So I direct the City Science Group at the MIT Media Lab, and we're thinking about this new model for cities. Particularly, we're thinking about how we can develop low-carbon cities on the one hand, but cities that also have a very strong social and economic performance. We think of this as entrepreneurial cities. So we're at MIT, which is in some ways the center of the universe of technology, many people think. It's always the #1 ranked engineering school in the world. But we don't think about technology alone. We like to try to bring together social science and much more comprehensive ideas about how cities function. This is the MIT Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Lab. Is sometimes thought of as a crazy building for very sane engineers. And then this is the Media Lab where we work. It's sometimes described as a very sane and rational building for more crazy engineers. And we have a series of labs within the Media Lab. We are one of those, but there's also a group that focuses on biomechatronics, thinking about high-tech prosthetic devices. Lifelong kindergarten is about continuous learning through life with the pleasure of that children have while learning carried over to adulthood. Sculpting evolution using new high-tech gene editing techniques like CRISPR to solve some of the grand health challenges, opera of the future, music and community engagement, but we're city science. So we think about this new model for cities. So let me just give you a kind of our version, our brief history of cities. So cities evolved thousands of years ago as very compact communities where people lived and worked and shopped. Most of what they consumed in life was produced locally. And this was a pattern that continued literally for thousands of years, exactly the same diagram as that early city in Mesopotamia, the two walls, the farm production and the outskirts, high density at the center. They were the size that somebody could walk in 15 to 20 minutes. Paris, medieval Paris, the same pattern. And as cities evolved, they were a network of these more compact neighborhoods like the 20 arrondissements of Paris. We're now beginning to think about a return to this settlement pattern. It's popularly known as the 15-minute city. All good. We're trying to go well beyond that. Now, what happened was around 1880 was the first mobility revolution. This was trams and subways coming into the city. City extended out in linear ways. This is Barcelona in 1908. Still high density, lots of activity on the street. Jump ahead 50 years. This is Boston, 1958. So the cars have taken over the city. The streets are not places for people, they're places for machines. And we're reaching now, I think, the end of this second mobility revolution. This is a video I shot in Beijing from a taxi window, you see, and a good day. It's all green and yellow, no red on that sign. So it gets worse than this. I think we're now entering the third mobility revolution, which is more of a focus back on the community and local community scale mobility. And in the process, thinking about how we can address these big challenges: climate, energy, economy, health, food, water, equity, peace. These are some of the big challenges. And I think we need to do it community by community. The planet, I think, will become a network of communities that form cities, and then cities form a network at the scale of a planet. To solve these problems, we need to think about action at all scales, from the individual, things an individual can do, all the way up to national and planetary scale. Most of the efforts, though, is at the top down. It's the things the government can do. You know, taxing the bad things, subsidizing the good things. We're more interested in what local communities can do. We think of this as hyper-local solutions to global challenges, more bottom-up solutions. This is critical because 70% of global emissions happen in cities. So we will not solve climate change unless we develop this new model for cities. Also, 90% of the population growth will take place in cities. And much of this growth will take place in informal settlements where people don't have access to conventional infrastructure. And in addition to that, cities are where 90% of the wealth will be created. Almost all the patents, all the innovation will take place in cities. So cities are where all the action is, and too many people forget about this hyperlocal action. We are continuing to develop what we think of as the city science process. I won't get into detail in this, but just to summarize, we start with insight, collecting and analyzing data so we understand what the current conditions are. That is essential. Then we think about transformation. What are the interventions that will improve on those conditions? Mobility, urban design, public policy, et cetera. Then we think about prediction. So you can have lots of good ideas, but you need to build simulation models to try to predict their impact on the local community and also scaled to the planet. I'll talk about that in a minute. Consensus, that is really critical because you can have lots of good ideas, show that they will likely work, but unless the community comes together and you reach a consensus on a shared vision of the future, action rarely happens. And finally, we need governance. This is enlightened public policy to maintain high-quality solutions over time. Now, this looks a little overwhelming, but this is our first attempt to build a local climate model with this dashboard. I won't get into the details. This is something Luis Alonso worked hard on. You'll hear from him in a minute. But the key thing is we have these 8 local interventions, and we can run scenarios where we look at the impact of each of these and their impact collectively on CO2 emissions and social performance. Let me just go through a few of those local interventions just to give you examples of what we're working on. First of all, percentage of electric vehicles. This gets a lot of attention. So we took the MIT Transportation Survey that shows where people live, how they travel, how they commute to MIT, and we calculated that roughly, on average, people generates 3 tons of CO2 emissions commuting. If you go to all electric vehicles, that drops down to 2.19. Useful improvement, but it won't save the planet. But if we provided housing near where people worked at MIT, it drops all the way down to 0.5, or a 6-fold increase in energy performance, CO2 emission performance related to commuting. So we think of one goal as achieving near zero commuting, huge impact. So in our model, you can see that if we dial up the percentage of electric vehicles, we can see the reduction in energy demand and in CO2 emissions. And even if you dial it all the way up to 100%, that results in maybe 250 megawatt hour reduction. Well, for Kendall Square, where MIT is. The second thing, live-work symmetry. This is putting housing near where people work. So we have built a model of the sites that are available for development around MIT. This is a Cityscope platform that we built, so real-time feedback when you change land use and density and introduce other systems. We can dynamically then tune all these in various ways, run through different scenarios. We can map our little optically tagged Lego bricks to different types of micro units, for example, and see the impact of different types of housing in different locations of the city. We can think about dynamic land use regulations, algorithmic zoning that will create incentives to develop in more pro-social way to encourage the development of workforce housing, family housing, grocery stores, daycare centers, and the like, to achieve something like civic homeostasis. Now, that was what you had in those early settlements that were operated a little bit like a natural ecosystem in balance. We're trying to think of governance mechanisms to achieve that with civil human systems. So we built a model where we can run through the impact of just having static incentives, no incentives, but then finally, if we have these dynamic feedback mechanisms, we can show that you can achieve a fairly significant improvement, not only in the environmental performance, but the social performance and the economic performance of a district. So anyway, live-work symmetry. If we actually achieved 100% balance between jobs and housing, we can achieve something in this current model of 625 megawatt reduction, much greater reduction in emissions than just transitioning to electric vehicles. Lightweight community scale mobility. So this is a project we did about 12 years ago called the City Car, and this is actually being tested in Vitoria. We had funding from the Basque region. This was a car that had robot wheels, drive-by-wire. The car would spin, it would fold, and to occupy very little space. But when we finished this project, I realized it was still a car, and we needed to move away from cars to much lighter modes. This is one of our current projects, which is just a little three-wheel community-scale vehicle that operates something like a social robot. It understands where people are and responds, ultimately, we hope, in a much more natural way, and becomes like a good citizen on the streetscape. And an even lighter mode that Naroa from our team will talk about. It's a little bicycle that converts to an autonomous tricycle. So we're much more interested in these lightweight community scale modes than cars. So if we move towards now these lightweight mobility systems, maybe we can achieve another 160 or so megawatts if that was fully implemented. Walkable access to amenities. So you don't only need housing in balance with jobs, but you need access to all of the resources that people need in daily living, the schools and the shopping and the healthcare, et cetera. So this is dynamically studying different land use alternatives where red is bad, green is good. I think Luis will talk a little bit more about this in detail. So in this case, she's replacing buildings with a park. We can model walkable access to parks. So then if we achieve this live-work symmetry plus walkable access to amenities, we can see the reduction in CO2 emissions are quite significant. High-performance housing. We think we needed this new model for housing as well, particularly with the challenge of an aging society and accommodating the needs of seniors, as well as young professionals in the city. In San Sebastian, very few young people live here. The housing is just unaffordable for young people, and that lowers the diversity and the innovation potential. This is a little apartment, 19 square meters, that has a queen-size bed, a dining room for 6 people, living room for 6 people, a little bathroom that opens up to a large walk-in bathroom with a shower, etc. We're now looking at ways of developing a standardized, low-carbon, even zero-carbon chassis, sort of a mass customization process from tiny apartments to large apartments using some of these strategies. This shows the transformation. The bed drops down from the ceiling, the walls move, little micro kitchen that functions as if it's much larger because you have just the things you need at the right time in the right place. Now people thought this was kind of a crazy idea, but we launched a startup company to commercialize this. And it is now led by the CEO of this company is Asier Larrea from San Sebastian, who was my visiting student and then master's student. So we're commercializing all these systems. We have funding from Alphabet, which is the Google parent company, and IKEA. We just closed another round of financing. So this company is doing pretty well. So we like to develop these ideas in the lab and get them out into the world through these startups. Now, if we could achieve this high-performance housing in cities, you can increase the density without the bulk, make apartments much more affordable, and if this was fully deployed, we have a significant increase in the social and economic performance. And finally now, production near the point of consumption. So this is the City Farm project, which is producing food in our lab. This was at our lab at the Media Lab. We're now taking these ideas to scale. Lots of companies have now come on board, particularly in Asia, high efficiency robotic food production. This could happen near the point of consumption in cities or on the outskirts of cities, eliminating these global supply chain of food. So finally, we can model the reduction in CO2 emissions, but we can also look at the environmental and the economic and the social performance holistically. So this is taking all of those interventions and modeling those. Anyway, that is a very brief summary of our work, and thank you for your attention.